For for folks who filter in later, we are going to be sharing this, the slide deck with folks, as well as we can provide a link to hopefully both the video recording and the transcript of this as well, if you'd like. So my name's Steve Dubin. I run a lightly used PR firm called PR Works, and we also own and manage My Pinnacle Network, a business-to-business once-a-month network for people who all travel in the same traffic lane of talking to business owners and influencing business owners. This podcast is sponsored by both Rockland Trust and South Shore networking professionals as well. Thanks to Lois Druckman and also Matt Phillips, who are part of South Shore networking professionals. And this particular podcast is going to talk about how to get involved with being a guest on podcasts. And before we start, I'd like to go to Joe Mosier to do a greeting. And before I have you jump in, Joe, for those of you who are listening, please mute yourself. And if you have any questions, please put it in the chat box, and Joe will be feeding me those questions throughout the presentation. All right. So, Joe,
yeah, one thing I'd also suggest would be to click on speaker view so that you're only seeing the person who is speaking and not the gallery of folks. And like I said, like Steve said, if you have a question, just put it in the chat section, and we'll address questions at the end or as we go along, depending on the question.
All right, thanks, Joe. And our other beloved Joe Mosier, Rockland Trust, who's been a friend and a great referral partner and a strategic partner. Joe, you want to talk a little bit about Rockland Trust and offer greetings from our lead sponsor?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Steve and Joe. Thanks for hosting today. And this is Joe Moser, Rockland Trust. I'm a business development officer with the bank. I specialize in business banking and commercial lending. I've been in banking for 20 plus years. And Rockland Trust, we're a full service commercial bank headquartered in Massachusetts. We have approximately 100 retail branches, commercial and residential lending centers, and investment management offices in Eastern Massachusetts. We've been named by the Boston Globe's top places to work list for the 11th consecutive year. We're rated #1 bank by Forbes magazine. And we're an honoree of the Boston Business Journal's 2020 Corporate Citizenships Award, which is a recognition of the region's top corporate charitable contributors. We have funded over 6,000 PPP loans, or roughly $808 million in funding, to help out many small businesses in the area. We'll be releasing an online portal soon for our Rockland Trust PPP loan customers so that they can submit for their forgiveness. We will be hosting a series of webinars called the Rockland Trust Business Strategy Series, where we will be addressing a variety of challenges faced by businesses today in wake of the COVID-19. Our first webinar is Fighting Back Against Fraud, scheduled for Wednesday, September 16th. And I'll send a link out to everybody here as well. And, Rockland Trust, relationships, are the focus of our bank. And that's what we do. We're here for, individual, customers who come in and want to bank personally, and businesses. It's very important. And that's what we do here, is building relationships and really providing support and resources for our customers. And we're in a great position to do that. I'll send out that link to everybody if they'd like to register for that first webinar. I'll get that out to everybody soon. And thank you again, Steve. And if anybody would like to connect with me, please connect with me through LinkedIn. That would be great.
Thanks so much, Joe. Okay, so why don't we get started? One of the things I do recommend is that I have been doing this for a while, and this presentation is not for me, it's for you. So please feel very free to ask lots of questions that we will do our best to answer. So first of all, the first major slide you see is of the beloved Blue Yeti mic. I did not take that photo, but you can actually see in my background, I have a Blue Yeti mic. And I would say that part of this discussion is to be a podcast guest, you don't need to buy things like a Blue Yeti mic or fancy lighting or backgrounds. Um, Being a podcast guest is a low cost entry to determine whether this channel works for you. We will talk about some simple equipment that's nice to have, but it's not really essential to learn whether podcasting is a good fit for you. So being a podcast guest is a great way to test the waters. A lot of people aren't ready to commit to having their own podcast, arranging for guests or arranging for topics. They're not ready to create a theme, a title, all the uploads that are involved, all the promotions that are involved. Being a guest takes a lot of that stress away. And what you can discover by being a podcast guest is that it might be a terrific way to tell your story. And Joe DeRamo, I want to refer to you. We had our client, Kevin Dubois of Lapels on as a podcast guest on a franchise show recently. You want to talk a little bit about that and how it really helped sort of underscore their message?
I think, well, it was a podcast that we had set up for him, and with a franchise. The theme of the show is franchising, and one of the very first questions they ask is, how'd you get into franchising? And I've worked with Kevin for about 8 years now. Steve has been involved longer, and I knew some of his background in restaurants and things like that, but he was the host gave him the latitude to talk about his first job in restaurants when he was 14 years old. And you really, is that what you call the log cabin story, Steve? I mean,
It is. That's the PR term.
And I think what you'll find with most podcast hosts, unless they're on a real tight schedule, I mean, when you're a guest, you're doing a lot of the work for them, so you have this wide open lane to tell your story from birth to today, practically. And it was a terrific appearance by Kevin, and it really kind of it's kind of my signature. That is what, when I want to show people what they should, what they can expect on a podcast, how they could perform on it. That's what one link I'm going to refer them to.
And just to summarize, that episode will now be repurposed on their website, on their social media. It'll be shared with potential franchise candidates, and it'll be a really good piece that talks about sort of the evolution of both the CEO and the company. And being on somebody else's high authority podcast makes it even more powerful.
And if I could just add one thing, it illustrates differences between the mediums. Print, you're very rarely going to have an opportunity to do that unless they seek you out. Whereas, usually they don't want things to be too promotional or self-promotional, and the podcasting medium just lends more to telling your own story and being a little self-promotional. So it's a nice option as opposed to paying for an advertorial in a newspaper.
Thanks, Joe. So what's the magnitude of the podcast world? Some people talk about this as similar to the beginning of blogging, where there were very few blogs and then it exploded. Well, we're still in the gold rush stage, even though we have 1 million podcasts out there. There's still plenty of room to be heard, to control your message, and to be part of a growing medium. So what can podcasting do for you? Even as a guest, it can greatly improve your credibility. Obviously, it's going to heighten your visibility, and it can actually generate leads. I mean, the holy grail is getting new business, but the other parts of being on a podcast is enhancing image and having fresh, relevant content that you can repurpose across all your other marketing channels, social media, your website, and so on. Is podcasting the right fit? Not everybody is comfortable being on a podcast, and quite frankly, it takes some practice. I think anything we do, you need to do repetitively to have that muscle memory and hone that ability. And Joe and I now co-host a couple podcasts. One is for My Pinnacle Network, which is called More Than the 2-Minute Drill. And we have another one called Way Outside the Box, about offbeat businesses that benefit from PR. And I can tell you that from episode 1 to now, somewhere around episode 10, the quality of those interviews has gone way up, not only for the hosts, but because of the energy we put out, it really greatly impacts the guests as well. So, is podcasting the right medium for you? Part of it is you need to determine, after some real testing, are you good on air? And then after some real documentation, is it delivering for you? What kind of feedback are you getting? Are you getting good feedback from guests? Are you getting to rub elbows with people you want to meet? Are you getting feedback from the outside world that they're interested in what you have to say, and they also may want to hear more? Leveraging existing audiences. So the beauty of being a guest is that your host probably has a pre-existing audience. They have people who've already subscribed to their podcast. They get it on an RSS feed or other manner. They probably promote it heavily across all of their marketing channels. And so without having to do much, you are getting in front of their audiences. Joe Duramo, can I go to you a little bit about any sense of that franchise audience that Lapels was in front of?
Yeah, it's basically people who are in the industry, or are franchisors or franchisees, or even prospects looking to buy a franchise. So it covers a wide range of markets that Kevin was trying to reach. I mean, telling their story to other franchisors, I'm not sure how much that can benefit them in some ways. A lot of Lapel's franchise owners are owners of other franchises, and it's kind of a desirable market for them. So it attracts that. And people, I think for prospects and maybe even current franchise owners who think, oh, owning a dry cleaner in addition to my restaurant chain, that could be a way to have mix up my investment portfolio. So it reaches all those markets. And what's the beautiful thing about that particular appearance was, yeah, there's an audience that probably listened to that. They might not have listened to it live. They might listen to it later on, and they might see it on their social media pages from that particular host. But the one unknown quantity is that say a year from now, somebody's searching for franchises and they stumble upon the hosts website, they're going to see an interview with Lapel's Dry Cleaning. And they might not have even been thinking about that, but they'll check it out. And there's this guy with this interesting story. He, self-made guy who kind of rose through his family business into franchising. And it really does offer, so that audience that they're going after, a little broader answer than you wanted, Steve, but it really does, it covers a lot more than you might think.
Thanks, Joe. I think you bring up a good point as well, that most podcasts have an infinite shelf life, that they're out there for a long time. And we're going to talk about both the pluses and the minuses of that. But they have a real strong lingering effect. So, let's see, before we approach most podcasts, we try to really have an understanding of what they're about. And we would recommend that you do that as well before you approach shows that you'd like to be on. And so it's as simple as listening to an episode or two and reading the show notes. The show notes, if you're looking on Spotify or iTunes or the dozens of podcast portals, there'll be a great amount of detail about the show itself and each of the segments. It's worth really having an understanding of that show so that you can pitch it appropriately, be prepared for the tone and the type of show it is, and impress the gatekeeper who's going to determine whether they want to have you on. So one of the things we say is be a fan first. When you're sending a pitch letter, and we'll talk specifically about how to pitch podcast hosts and producers, part of that pitch would be being authentically referring to something about a previous segment so that they know that you've done your homework, you're interested, and you understand what their show and their theme is about. Now, one of the dangers of podcasting is that you may think that this is an open forum for you to pitch and sell and have a thinly veiled commercial. In reality, you really have to follow the lead of the host. Sometimes hosts, as Joe said earlier, will give you a really wide berth, and they really do want to hear a full story about the immersion of your concept or your career. But in many cases, they really want some strong, interesting anecdotes that make the segment relatable to their audience. So you have to think about what are some of the stories you want to tell as opposed to the product or the service you want to sell. So why do people even listen to podcasts? It's all the following reasons to the left. I think that they really don't want to, it's not a classroom situation. It's more of an entertainment. People are working out, they're driving to work, they are cleaning the house, they're going for a walk. They want to be entertained and perhaps educated as they go, but it has to be interesting. And because people are using their listening sense and sometimes their visual sense, you are their companion as they're doing something. So you want to keep in mind that your approach is from a friendly neighbor over the fence, providing useful information and a good story. Joe, you want to talk a little bit about that? The difference between an interview on a podcast versus, remote learning.
Well, it is quite different because you're getting the story directly from the. It's not a tutorial. that you're listening to. You're listening to real people and real stories. So I think, when you're on, you're kind of giving people something to relate to. And I know we keep going back to Kevin Dubois' story, but he talked about working in his father's restaurant and how this opportunity came about. And it's something that all of us who got into business one time or another in their lives had some sort of story where we got our start. And you can relate to that. It's like, oh yeah, I didn't start off. I wasn't the the owner's son who went into management role. I actually had to work to get to where I was. And I think that's what really sells. It's not, oh, we've got this franchise that's for less than $25,000, you can have your own franchise and be up and running. It's really about what type of organization you want to be a part of.
Okay, thanks, Joe. So what makes a great pitch? I mean, really, your challenge is that, especially for larger shows with bigger audiences, they're getting a lot of pitches every day. So there's a big difference between Ira Glass's This American Life on National Public Radio versus somebody who has an accountant in Abington who's just starting out in podcasting. The larger the show, the more detail you need to provide them so that they see you as a legitimate potential guest. So part of our pitch is a cover note that is a summary, and then a one sheet that includes a good headshot, the topics that you are comfortable talking about, some sample questions that they could ask you so they don't even have to think about how this segment will work. They can use that as a cheat sheet. And then sort of what's your background, what makes you interesting, what makes you qualified to be the expert on your subject. You also want to provide them with all the URLs to the channels that relate to who you are. So your website and all your social media, so that they can see, the kind of messaging you're putting out, maybe the kind of audience that you have, to make sure that there is a match. And they're also, some of these folks are mercenary enough to know that if you have a large audience, they can ride on your coattails as well. So as an example, for our podcast, in addition to the audience that we deliver, we have a database. How big is our database of email that we share upcoming podcast information with, Joe?
About 7,000.
Right. So that's a fairly large audience. So even if people don't listen or watch the podcast, they are getting great visibility in with our audience via email and social media as well. So what kind of questions do you want the host to ask you? They can't be as self-serving as why are you such a great guy, or how did you become such an expert? It really has to be a lot more original, timely, entertaining, and informational. And so what they're really looking for is about a dozen questions that really talk about some of the challenges you've experienced, how you've overcome them, and how things have changed over time. And so humor, I think, part of the challenge is some people get intimidated when they're on air in any fashion. And they forget that really everything always goes off script. And so you have to be loose, you have to be relaxed, and you just have to be human. And you need to be ready to talk about funny, maybe even self-deprecating stories. or authentic stories so that you can connect to an audience. One of the things you want to talk about is street credibility. So how did you earn your stripes? What brought you to truly claim the position of expert? And so I'll give you an example. In my case, I was a reporter, covered anywhere from investigative reporting to general assignment reporting to even some sports. And that really helped me understand how to tell stories, how to reach audiences, and how the media worked. And it helped me learn other ways to tell stories using other channels. And that gives me fairly good street credibility. There are lots of PR people who've never really been on the other side of the table of the media. They don't understand what it's like to be in a newsroom. So part of what can make a podcast interesting are case studies or case in point, where your story is talking about, let's say we buy ugly houses. How did we help someone get out of a house, someone else get into a house, and there's a win-win-win across the process. How did the transaction work, and how did it work on a very personal level, using names, addresses, as much as you can without violating somebody's privacy. So the more authentic the case study, oftentimes the more compelling the story.
Stephen, if I could just add to that, that's one of the things, a little commercial for My Pinnacle Network, but when we ask people to give their verbal brands, one of the things we ask is, how your business is different, how you're better than your competition, using a customer or a client's story as an example. And it's something you probably should be doing as part of your networking anyway. And the fact that it segues nicely into a podcast appearance where you can even expound on those experiences, that's why podcasts are a great opportunity to add to your networking and practice your networking skills.
Thanks, Joe. And by the way, let me know if there's any questions coming in.
No, we're good.
Okay. So once you're accepted to be on a podcast, that's really the beginning of the journey. You want to make sure that you don't fumble the opportunity and let things fall through the cracks. And so there are a number of things that you really want to clarify, like what time zone are you in? Here's the time zone I'm in. Let's make sure that we're talking whatever time we are reserving. Let's make sure we understand and agree upon when that is. And we also want to typically I remind all parties of a podcast appearance the day of, because things just simply fall through the cracks. Is the podcast taped or live? So obviously there are different circumstances. We tend to tape our podcasts so we can do a little bit of editing on them if we want to, but on live, it's just out there. The length of the segment, so you want to know, how long you need to sort of position your stories, how much depth you're going to be providing, what you can expect in terms of a time frame so that you're fully prepared. Most podcasts are less than half an hour, which is the average commute. Remember the good old days when people actually went to work? So it's built around that, but some are longer and some are shorter. In particular, when we tend to use Zoom to do our podcasts, and we use the video from Zoom as well as the audio. We use the video and we upload it to YouTube. YouTube really suggests shorter is better, as opposed to audio can be longer. People tend to be more patient with just listening as they have their headphones on, they're going about doing their business. You want to know the release date of your podcast so that you can promote it on your end. You can share it with your email list, and all of your audiences. And you also want to know where the podcast will be available. Joe, can you talk a little bit about what channels we tend to upload podcasts to, the audio portion?
Yeah, we typically use Anchor to produce the podcast. It goes out to Spotify and Google, Radio Republic, and a number of other outlets. I think there's 6 or 7 that gets distributed to, but we load them up via Anchor.
Right, and so a footnote on Anchor is it's a free service that allows you to produce right on its platform, and then it will help you broadcast the segment once you've approved it to a variety of different podcast portals. It's very easy to use. So one of the things you want to impress upon the potential host and producer so they will say yes to having you on is, how do you add value for them? What's your track record potentially of being on other shows so they know that you don't freeze up, that you are a good guest, that you can entertain an audience, and what kind of feedback have you gotten from audiences? Currency. So part of the currency of being on a podcast is that you get to expand your audience. You're going to pick up people who now want to follow your e-newsletter. They're going to want to follow your social media. You're able to stay in touch with them and potentially convert them to strategic partners or clients. You're able to anywhere from sell books to webinars to services. And there's a lot that can be accomplished. You want to make sure that you're careful about when you make your pitch and how you make your pitch.
Steve, we had a question from somebody about cost to push out podcasts. And there are some services you can pay for to do that. Anchor, like Steve mentioned, is free. So you have paid in free options out there to get your podcast out to different outlets.
Yeah, there's a good dozen platforms like Anchor. We just have found it to be one of the easier ways to get things done, and until you get larger and you need lots of confirmation of the uploads to the various portals, a lot of the free services are fine. One of the next topic I want to jump to, though, is how to find potential podcasts that might fit your topic and the kind of audience you want to reach. And so these 6 squares tell you some of the places to look. I find really one of the easier ways to find podcasts is to go right to Google, and I will use a Boolean search of something like podcast producer business topics, and that will tend to bring in quite a bit of viable podcast opportunities for me. But there are lots of other places to look, including podcast.co, podcastguest.com. We use all of these things. We also subscribe to a service called Cision, which is a general PR online service that gives us access to all of media in North America. So it's not hard for us to find a good fit for us and our clients. You can use these tools as well.
Steve, we had a question from somebody about, how do you get to be on a podcast if you're a newbie and you have no track record? And I don't know if you want to answer that. I can offer my 2 cents. Is that
Sure, go ahead.
people? I really don't think the host knows you're a newbie. You're not a newbie at what you do, where your area of expertise, more than likely. So it's really a question of your pitch. I've yet to have somebody, a producer or a host, ask me, "Oh, do you have any clips of this person on a podcast somewhere?" You tell them the story and they respond to that. So I think being a newbie is really just a matter of finding the right fit, doing your research, like Steve said. The podcast we've been talking about with Kevin, I found that via LinkedIn. It wasn't even listed in some of these directories, and it was a great find. And I basically told them the story, and they liked it, and they thought it would be good, and that was kind of the end of it. So it really is a question of how you pitch yourself, more so than whether or not you've been on the air before.
I think that's well said. And we're also on the vanguard of a new medium. So there are lots of podcasts and lots of podcasts who need guests. And they're going to be more welcoming and open to guests who give them a reasonable, professional, interesting pitch. And so it's more about the pitch than it is your experience at being on podcasts. So another way to find appropriate podcasts that you might want to be on is to look at people who you compete with, other influencers in your world. Where are they? What podcasts are they on? If you do a search on them, you will find all of those clips. So when I look for other marketing guru types, it's not hard for me to find anywhere from TED Talks to other things that they're on. And it gives me some sense of where I might want to be as well.
Steve, we had a question. Is any advice about LinkedIn trollers who are trying to invite you to their podcast without even knowing you?
That's interesting. I think I haven't had that experience. What I would suggest is that you do some intelligence on them before you accept it. It's similar to accepting or rejecting a LinkedIn connection request. I get a lot of those, and I reject probably more than half because I don't know them and I'm leery of who they are. And when I do research, I'm not finding anything that will tell me that they're real. So I would do some research first and proceed with caution. But I would assume that, in some cases, for some clients, we act as the producer of their podcast, and we are actively seeking interesting, appropriate guests for their podcast, and we will do research and reach out to strangers at times ourselves. So one of the really interesting podcasts that we just started was for a relationship coach who is seeking her first relationship, having not been in one for 7 years. And she's having a variety of other relationship coaches provide tips for her and the general audience of how to attract a mate and how to have better relationships in general. And so we're in the process of reaching out to a makeover artist, someone who provides clothing to change someone's style and look, as well as a variety of relationship experts. And so it's not uncommon for us to reach out to strangers who seem to fit the bill. Website form versus submission. Website form submission versus email. So on a lot of the websites that list podcasts, they don't give you contact information for the host and the producer and how to connect to see if they would have you on. And what I provided to you here were a couple places that help you sort of reverse engineer and find email addresses, in addition to using a simple Google search. So what does it take? Most of the time you don't get on a podcast with a simple email or even a phone call. It requires some real follow-up, just like almost any other sales or marketing outreach. And so I would encourage you not to give up, but to set up a spreadsheet so that you're able to track the number of contacts that you've made to specific podcasts that you feel are appropriate for you. And so we recommend, an initial email and then, 4 follow-up phone calls. And what we also do is each time we make a follow-up phone call, we will resend the email as well saying, perhaps you didn't get a chance to see this. We'd really like to be on your show, and so on. So persistence really pays off and is important in this outreach, especially the bigger the show, the more activity they get and the more requests they get. So I said you don't need much equipment, but if indeed you do want to get some equipment, and as you continue, if you find this to be a medium that works for you, there are some simple things that you can have, like the headset I'm wearing, like the headset she's wearing. I actually plug my headset into my Blue Yeti so that I'm getting more controlled, isolated sound, but I'm able to take advantage of the condenser mic, the quality of the Blue Yeti. The Blue Yeti goes for about $100. A headset you can get for as inexpensively as $19 at Staples. So simple things. Show up on time. Usually I find people show up 5 minutes early to podcasts and they're ready to go. They're able to have a little chit chat, get comfortable, sort of talk about the ground rules, what to expect. And then the host will tend to say, we're gonna start in just a minute, and I'll give you the countdown and let you know when we're live. But obviously, there's no room to be late for a podcast. Lighting is critical. You can see that my face is fairly well lit up. I've got 2 lamps on the other side of my laptop. I've got fluorescent lighting over my head, and I've got sunlight to the right. So it's lighting up. I almost look human and 3-dimensional. What I also did was I bought the famous ring that can be clipped onto your laptop that adds some additional frontal lighting. Steve Mason, can I go to you and have you unmute for a second and talk a little bit about lighting? It's nice to have a talented photographer on the call, if you don't mind sharing a little bit about lighting.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I've got a similar thing. I've got a light behind it's an iMac, a big iMac that's bouncing off the wall. But I also spent $8 and got this, I think it's like a 8-foot coiled light. I don't know if you can see this.
Yes.
I got it on, Googled it and found it, and I think it was like $8 or $10, and I wrapped it around my computer screen twice, and that gives me some fill light. And then with the light in the back, like right now you're seeing just window light, but it's a little harsh in the shadows depending on how much sunlight, and I can't count on that. So the background light, which I have on a rheostat, I just dial in where I think it looks good.
Okay. And so to summarize, though, you're saying you basically need light from a number of angles and certainly some brighter light in front of your face so we can actually see you.
Yeah, to me, the worst situation is when somebody's sitting in front of a backlight and they're just a big black dark shadow and you can't make out who they are. So now you're subconsciously not as interested in their message. I mean, it's not something a lot of people are aware of, but it just gives you essentially a false perception. First impressions are the most important. So you want to be able to be seen clearly, heard clearly, and of course, how you relate your message is another part of that.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, this is sort of off topic from the discussion at the moment, but we had a question about recorded podcasts and do you need to ask permission to put that on your web? Let's say you're a guest and you get a link from the host. Do you need permission to put that on your website? And what's sort of the protocol? What's acceptable? And Steve Mason answered the question for me, but basically I believe most podcasts are so happy to bring in additional listeners, they'll give it away. But just ask the question if you're uncomfortable. If you're not sure, just, is it okay if I put it on my website or blog? I'm sure they'll say yes.
Right. I mean, we also have sign-off forms that we do use on occasion, but it's very rare that somebody isn't thrilled that you are helping expand their message. So, okay. So one of the keys to being a great guest is really having a quiet, focused presentation. And some people forget this. I mean, I've had anywhere from kids waltzing through the background that we had to edit out to the dog barking, and it goes on and on. And so one of the things I have is about a 12-point checklist that I go over before I start podcasts of, make sure you turn off your landline, turn off your cell phone, put a note on the door saying, please do not disturb, threaten children and ex-wives not to interrupt you, close windows so that you don't hear ambulances going by, all the things that will give you a better chance of having good sound quality. And then some tips on being a better guest. I think some business folks can't help themselves, and they try to control an interview as opposed to realizing that they are just a guest, and they really should take the cue from the host and allow the host to set the tone and try to be in the moment of, instead of having an agenda that you want to present, try to go with the thought of the moment and provide real focused feedback to that person. Do be ready to have stories ready. Do be ready to have stories that are succinct, interesting, and well told. Some people tend to ramble, or they give you facts that are just not all that interesting. And then the most important part of any presentation is brevity. So, sound bites are called that for just a reason. It's just a bite. It's just a short presentation, not a soliloquy, not a speech. So I alluded to earlier that one of the beauties of podcasting and the challenge as well is that they have somewhat of an infinite shelf life. Oftentimes they're there forever. And so you don't necessarily want to talk about if the host asks you, so how do people reach you? Why don't you tell them about your new project? You don't want to talk about the webinar that's happening next week, probably, because obviously that's irrelevant 5 years down the road. You really want to talk about things that are evergreen, anywhere from, a free audit of anywhere from their PR to their photography to their insurance. And what are some of the ongoing programming or services that, you tend to offer. And then, thank you goes a long way. I recommend a written thank you note to the host, an email that talks about what else can I do to help you promote. Oftentimes the host and the producer will have a punch list of, here's some things we'd like you to do. Here's the link that we're sharing with you. And here's what you can do with it yourself that would help us. Sometimes they even prepare. I've been on podcasts where they gave me a series of social media posts that I could use to promote that segment more than once. You want to add people to your e-newsletter list, and you want to connect with them in general. And that's all you need to know. If we can be of any help, you can reach us at our website, which is listed there, prworkzone.com. We help a lot of people get organized, come up with a title for their show that might be not taken and still provocative, interesting, and direct enough so people understand what it's about. We help people with the technology they may need to put together a podcast and broadcast it. We help people get guests and organize the guests and make sure that they show up. And I'm also happy to talk to people at no cost to just answer questions and help you, organize yourself. So anything we can do, we'd be delighted to do. Joe, any other questions in the queue?
I don't see any questions.
Okay.
So
All right.
Steve,
So-
can I
Yes,
ask
go
a
ahead.
question?
Sure.
So I'm assuming you offer this as part of maybe a strategic plan for your clients and from a PR perspective, right?
Well, we do it both as part of a plan, and also we offer it as a freestanding service as well.
So if that's the case, how does one take doing podcasts or being on podcasts as part of a plan to get more recognition? In other words, I see this kind of as a stepping stone, but so then, can you use this to drive traffic to your website? Can you use this to get connections to, to have one-to-one meetings, all those things combined? And is there any tricks or ways that we might look at that and plan that in?
Right. It's a good question. So I sort of yes to all of the above. The idea is typically the host will have a predetermined agreement with you that at the end, they'll typically both at the beginning and the end, they'll say to you, Steve, how else do we reach you? And so typically what we recommend is that you send them to your website, but on your website, on your homepage, there is a lead magnet of some sort, like an ebook or an article or some freebie that you can offer them and capture their contact information and continue that relationship. And that relationship should include being added to your e-newsletter, encouraging them to go to your social media so they follow you, and so on. And we have a lot of clients that offer all kinds of free audits of anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour of tell me your situation. I'll do my best to give you feedback. And if that helps you, you can be merrily on your way, or we'd be able to help you in a deeper, more long-term basis. So it's not, in my opinion, a podcast is correct. It's part of a marketing plan, but it is something that can feed a lot of your other channels. Joe, did you want to say something?
I just want to interject on a couple things. The ebook thing, I think, is an excellent point. One of in booking people on podcasts like we do, it's a ton easier when you've got somebody who's written a book of some sort. Traditional books are fine, but even if it's an ebook, like 10 tips on how to do this better in your business, and you use it as a lead magnet, even if you're not charging money, you can make it part of the pitch. And basically it provides the host kind of an outline of what the interview could look like. So if, again, Steve is right, this is all part of the package of how you present yourself, but it's a very effective one. And if you're doing all the other things, this is just a natural extension of that.
Just let me say, Steve, we practice what we preach. So if you go to our homepage, you'll see that my ebook, PR 101, is there. And it is a good way for us to start relationships as well. And I offer that to the audience. Is there anyone else who wants to unmute and maybe ask a verbal question before we we summarize and say
Steve,
goodbye?
I got a question.
Yeah.
I mean, a podcast strictly for, are they out to make money? Are they out for informational purposes? Do you ever pay someone to get on a podcast? Or how do they make money, or why do they keep doing it if they're not making any money on it? As you
Okay.
said, it's part of the package.
Well, it's a good question. So there are ways to make money on podcasting. That is usually further down the road when you have a larger audience that you can monetize. So there are sponsors who want to be on your podcast. There are a handful of ways that you can monetize that audience. But typically, podcasts are designed to generate leads. And the kind of business podcasts that we're working on are really designed to generate leads for business clients. That new business is far more valuable than the money that they might make from sponsors. Typically, sponsorships are low end. Now, some of you are probably familiar with Joe Rogan, who is sort of the king of podcasting. He got in early, and he tends to do very long audio podcasts that last over an hour, and he just signed a deal for over $1 million. But that's really the aberration. Most people do it because it enhances their image, it gives them credibility, it allows them to rub elbows with guests who they want to get to know, and it gives them that leadership position that tends to generate business opportunity. So I don't necessarily recommend that anybody get into podcasting thinking that they're going to make great money from advertising or sponsorships. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us.
People have their hands raised.
Excuse me?
How much people have their hands raised?
Oh, okay. I can't see you, so go right ahead.
You're better off. I'm not that good looking. That's why I'm in radio. This is Craig Wolf. I'm with Greg Brasso on Veteran Voice Radio. And he suggested that I listen to this. We do a weekly radio show and have a lot of contact to the top veteran resources, from healthcare to business to, that was pretty good. That scared me. How'd you do that?
Just part of the magic we
You
bring.
just came into, you really did come into my house. How do you do? It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, you
Put
too.
your mask on. You're not 6 feet away.
Nor am I 6 feet tall.
Yeah. So thank you for all that information. It was terrific. So we're basically doing the structure of a podcast every week, and then we do resource fairs, but we haven't been turning them into podcasts. So thank you for putting us in the right direction. I mean, just, the idea of how do you get it out? You go on to, I just wrote it down, to go on Anchor type of thing, that kind of information is so important. When the boomers, the kids go on and say, well, you just go here. Well, how the hell do you just go here? That's our problem. So you just gave us some good information to do that. So I really appreciate that. And thank you. So we're just going to use part of our shows or have the people come on before our show and set it up in the WATD studios. So we kind of have a head start, but we don't know how to put it together. So this was helpful, how to tie it in.
Good. Yeah, I've talked to Greg Brasso about this, and you guys feel free to give me another call if you want additional input.
Because we're a couple of, as we joke around, bullheaded Lithuanians, and we're not too good with electronics.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, we need a little push in the right direction.
Okay.
So I just wanted to thank you very much for that. This was a big help.
Thank you. Good to have you on. Was there somebody else who raised their hand? Now I can see
Yeah.
everybody.
Yes, Steve, I had a question.
Angela, why don't you go first?
Myself?
Yes.
Okay.
Angela.
One thing I was curious to know is, should people focus on the person first or the business first? For instance, if someone like me with 14,000 things that they love to do, or a lot of things, like, what would you suggest people go on a podcast for? Just so people can get to know you in general, or really to focus on the business? Or does it depend on what your interest is in the podcasting world?
Right, it's really about what you want to achieve. So, there are some people who have a very personal story about survival or overcoming difficult circumstances, and they become inspirational speakers, and that might be their approach. And so that's a very personal story. Most of the podcasts that we manage are directly related to some sort of business service or community service. And I think it's easier to talk about that because it's so much more tangible than a personal story, unless your personal story is really amazing. Does that answer your
Barb?
question?
Hi, thanks. I'm Barbara
Hi,
Grossi
Barbara.
of Managed Copyright.
Hi, Barbara.
The answer to one of the things you was a question about, should you pay to be on podcasts?
All right. Yeah. So the answer is no. I mean, I can simplify that for you. We have that same answer for media in general that ask us for production fees or for advertorial fees. Paid visibility usually is it's veneerly thin, and the audience can see that it's a paid message, and it rings inauthentic and salesy. And so one of the resources we use called Radio Guest, some of their podcasts ask for payment for guests, and we just discard those. I think that the merits of your being a guest are based on the story you have to tell, not whether you can pay for it or not. Anyone else? Okay.
No.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. We will follow up via email with the slide deck that I will share with you, as well as the transcript. Hopefully we will get as well. And if we can be a resource for you, we'd be delighted to. So we will keep you informed of other upcoming events sponsored by South Shore Networking Professionals and My Pinnacle Network and Rockland Trust. So thank you for being here. We'll catch up with you down the road. Take care, everybody.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everybody.